Welcome! Today we'll explore how spacesuits protect astronauts in space. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enjoy. Darkness, silence, the vast, endless void of space. Then, panic. A sharp, metallic gasp fills the astronaut's helmet as his oxygen levels plummet. His visor fogs slightly from his own breath. Outside, the abyss stretches forever, punctuated only by distant stars. His suit, the only thing keeping him alive, has been compromised. A tiny, imperceptible tear, no larger than a pinprick, threatens to end everything. A spacesuit isn't just clothing. It's a miniature spaceship, a meticulously engineered survival chamber designed to withstand the deadliest environment known to humankind. Temperatures swing from blistering heat to bone-freezing cold in an instant. The vacuum of space offers no air, no pressure, no mercy. Yet, inside this suit, a thin shell of advanced materials separates life from certain death. But what happens when that shell is breached? What if, floating miles above Earth, something as small as a micrometeoroid punctures the fabric? It's an astronaut's worst nightmare. The body doesn't explode as Hollywood might suggest, but the consequences are just as terrifying. Boiling, saliva, swelling skin. A race against time before unconsciousness takes over. How does a spacesuit keep astronauts alive in the face of these dangers? And more importantly, how does it prevent the unthinkable from happening? Commander Alex Carter drifted through the silent void, tethered only by a thin lifeline to the spacecraft Odyssey 7. The massive, silver-plated station hung in orbit above Europa, one of Jupiter's icy moons, bathed in the distant golden glow of the sun. Below, cracks in the moon's frozen surface hinted at a vast hidden ocean, a world still unknown. Carter had spent his career preparing for this, exploring the frontiers of human existence. But right now, something was wrong. The mission had been routine, an external hull inspection before the next descent attempt. A simple checkup, nothing more. Yet as Carter reached for his tether reel, his heads-up display flickered. A warning flashed in bright red across his visor. Pressure drop detected. His breath hitched. The suit was failing. He twisted his wrist to pull up diagnostics, his gloved fingers hovering over his wrist-mounted interface. Oxygen levels dropping. Temperature control fluctuating. There was no visible tear, no sign of an impact. But something, somewhere, had breached the integrity of his suit. Back inside the spacecraft, mission specialist Dr. Evelyn Reyes monitored his vitals. "Alex, I'm seeing a pressure loss in your suit. What's your status?" He exhaled, trying to keep his voice steady. "Something's wrong, Evelyn. Losing pressure, but I don't see any damage." "Stand by. I'm running a diagnostic." Carter's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He had studied spacesuits for years, trained in emergency protocols, but theory and reality were two different things. A punctured suit in space meant only one thing. Time was running out. Outside, Europa's horizon curved beneath him, the sun dipping lower, casting long shadows across the ice. He had no time to admire the view. His hands moved fast, scanning, his suit with practiced precision, checking seals, verifying oxygen intake. The reinforced layers of his suit, polyurethane-coated nylon, ultra-resistant Kevlar, thermal insulation, were supposed to hold, but something had bypassed them. Then, he felt it, a strange cold creeping along his left arm, seeping in like liquid nitrogen. The sensation was impossible. His suit was built to withstand temperatures from 250 degrees to 250 degrees. The only explanation? A breach too small for his eyes to detect, but big enough to threaten his survival. A voice crackled through his helmet. "Alex, listen to me. We need to find the leak now, or you won't have enough oxygen to get back inside." His training kicked in. He reached for his emergency patch kit, but his fingers trembled. The cold was spreading. How much time did he have? 5 minutes? 3? His vision blurred for a moment before he forced himself to focus. The Odyssey 7 loomed just 20 meters away. If he could make it back inside, he could repair the suit. But then, another warning. Oxygen reserves critical. He wasn't going to make it, not without a solution. As he floated in the abyss, a single question burned in his mind. What exactly keeps a spacesuit from failing? How had engineers designed these suits to withstand the merciless conditions of space? And why, despite all their advancements, had his failed? He had no choice but to push forward, racing against time to reach the airlock before the void claimed him. Commander Alex Carter's breath was a rapid rhythm in his helmet. He kicked off the hull of the Odyssey 7, forcing his body to move despite the draining cold creeping through his suit. His heart raced faster than his movements, each second feeling like an eternity as he floated toward the airlock. His gloved fingers fumbled with the tether, trying to reel it in, but the cold had begun to numb his extremities. His mind flickered between calculation and desperation. The mission was supposed to be straightforward, a simple routine check. Yet here he was, facing an invisible enemy that had breached the very armor designed to protect him. As he drifted closer to the spacecraft, a strange shimmer caught his eye. It wasn't a reflection of starlight, it was something else. His vision sharpened, and he noticed it, a faint, hazy ripple in the space around him. It wasn't a distortion, but something more subtle, a shift in the fabric of reality itself. The air around him felt heavier. His head throbbed, a dull pressure building in his temples. "Evelyn," he called out, his voice strained through the comms. "Do you see this? There's something wrong out here." There was a brief silence before her voice crackled through, static-laced and distant. "What do you mean, Alex? I'm not seeing anything on the sensors." The shimmer intensified, swirling around him like a thin veil of heat waves in the desert. Carter's skin prickled, and a gut-wrenching unease spread through his body. The icy cold creeping from his arm had now turned into a searing sensation, as though something was crawling beneath his suit, beyond the protection of its layers. A twisted, primal fear stirred within him, but he fought it back, focusing on the mission. He stretched out his hand, gliding through the zero gravity, trying to make sense of the phenomenon. His fingers brushed against something solid. But as soon as he touched it, it vanished. The ripple was gone. Was it a hallucination? Had the suit's pressure fluctuation begun affecting his mind? He tried to ignore the unease rising within him and focused on his primary objective: get back inside the ship. He needed to assess the damage to his suit, or there would be no second chances. But the anomaly, the shimmer, it hadn't been in his mind. He was sure of it. Carter's breath quickened as the reality of the situation set in. His oxygen reserves were rapidly depleting. He could feel his pulse in his neck, the tightness in his chest beginning to suffocate him. His hand trembled as he gripped the airlock handle, but as he pulled it, the door refused to budge. "Evelyn!" His voice cracked. "The airlock is stuck. I need help." "What? That's impossible," Evelyn replied, her voice filled with disbelief. "It's never malfunctioned before. The door should be releasing now." "Something's wrong with the whole ship, Evelyn," Carter said, panic creeping into his tone. He thrashed at the airlock, pulling with everything he had, but it remained sealed tight. There was no way to force it open. He turned back to the distant shimmering void, a cold sweat trickling down his spine. What was going on? The mission had gone wrong in ways no one could have predicted. He had to find answers. A new thought began to gnaw at him. What if this wasn't just a simple breach of his suit? What if this whole mission had triggered something far darker? He remembered the warning from months before, the strange signal, intercepted by Earth's deep space telescopes, a frequency pattern that no one could explain. The code had been dismissed as interference. But now, with this anomalous phenomenon before him, he wasn't so sure. "I'm going to check the external sensors," Carter said, trying to remain calm. He turned away from the stubborn airlock and began to float toward the ship's external panel, hoping to find any clue, any signal that could explain what he was seeing. He reached the panel, his gloved hands working the controls as his breath came in shallow bursts. The external sensors displayed their typical readings: stable temperatures, normal radiation levels, a standard view of the cold, lifeless expanse of space. But then, a flicker. It wasn't just the usual blip of a glitch. It was a full, erratic pulse, a brief flash of something massive, something lurking just beyond the edges of their instruments. "Evelyn," he whispered, the chill in his voice cutting through the static. "We're not alone out here." His hands shook as he activated the ship's wide-range scanners, trying to capture more of the signal. The screen flickered again, and then nothing. Then, something even more terrifying happened. The stars above Europa began to shift. Carter froze. He wasn't imagining it. The stars weren't staying in their positions. They were subtly warping, bending like light through water. The cosmos, the vast, static canvas that had always been so predictable, was suddenly changing. An invisible force tugged at his chest. He could feel it deep inside his bones, the sensation that something was watching, something ancient, something beyond human comprehension. The anomaly wasn't just in the fabric of space around him. It was in the very heart of the universe itself, folding in on itself like a wound. He tried to push the thoughts away, focusing on the task at hand. His suit's failure was escalating, and he couldn't let his mind spiral. He had to survive. He had to get inside and repair the breach. But his mind couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something older than time itself, waiting just beyond the veil of reality. Carter didn't realize how far he had drifted from the ship until he turned around and saw it. The Odyssey 7, once a beacon of safety, now appeared distant, small, almost ethereal, as if its own existence was beginning to blur. The shimmer he had felt earlier was back, swirling around the spacecraft, a visual distortion like the air itself was warping. A sharp, metallic crack rang out through his earpiece. "Alex!" Evelyn's voice screamed, desperate and frantic. "The ship's hull integrity is failing. There's a pressure buildup on the aft side. You need to get back now or we'll lose the whole station." His stomach twisted. There was no more time for hesitation. With everything he had left, Carter pushed himself toward the airlock again, racing against the pulse of an unseen clock. His suit's life support systems were failing, but it wasn't the suit that worried him anymore. It was the dark presence creeping in at the edges of his mind. The horrifying truth that something far worse than a mere technical malfunction was unfolding in the depths of space. And whatever it was, it had already begun to make its move. Carter pushed himself forward, the stars blurring around him, his breath ragged inside the helmet. The ship was slipping farther away, an impossible distance, stretching as the universe itself seemed to bend. His heart thudded in his chest, but it wasn't just from the exhaustion or the threat of suffocating in space. It was the overwhelming presence of something alien, something ancient, pushing against the boundaries of space and time. His hands were numb, his vision narrowing, when he finally reached the airlock again. The shimmering distortion in the distance grew louder in his ears, like a pulse reverberating through the very fabric of space. He yanked the door again, desperation rising, but still, it wouldn't open. The pressure was building on his suit. His chest felt tight, as though the very vacuum of space were pulling at him from all directions. "Evelyn, His voice cut off, a sudden dizziness clouding his thoughts. Something inside his helmet sparked. Light, swirling, flashing bright. His whole body shuddered as a wave of unbearable cold surged through his suit. It wasn't the external cold of space, but something else. Something inside his suit. His eyes widened in horror as the metal door of the airlock began to ripple, warping in slow motion like it was being bent by an unseen hand. The edges flickered like the stars had earlier, but it wasn't just an optical illusion, it was real. The fabric of the ship itself was unraveling. "No, no, no!" Carter shouted, slamming his palm against the airlock's surface. His fingers meant nothing but an empty void. It was as though the Odyssey 7 was fading out of existence. Then, the truth hit him, his mind racing to connect the pieces. The pressure, malfunction, the shimmering distortion. The warped stars, the airlock refusing to open, the breach in his suit. It wasn't a simple failure of technology or a freak accident. It was the ship itself that was dissolving into another dimension. A rift, tearing open between their reality and something darker. His breath caught in his throat as the horrifying realization unfolded. The ship was part of the anomaly. The Odyssey 7 wasn't floating in space. It was suspended between worlds, caught in a tear in the fabric of reality itself. There was no back inside, there was no escape. The ship, the suit, even the universe they knew, was beginning to collapse in on itself. The stars above weren't simply shifting, they were being erased. In a final desperate attempt to understand, Carter reached for the last thing he could control, his suit's emergency interface. His trembling fingers keyed in a sequence to release an external analysis of the ship's surroundings. But just as the data began to form, the entire screen blinked out, replaced by one chilling word: void. It wasn't just space that had been altered. This wasn't the cosmos as he had known it. This was something wrong. A realm where the laws of physics and time itself were meaningless. A place that existed beyond comprehension. For a moment, he felt utterly, impossibly small. The universe around him, what remained of it, seemed to bend and ripple, as though everything was about to fold in on itself. His suit's sensors screamed in protest, flickering wildly. Reality was unraveling. Then, silence. The pulse of the anomaly ceased. For an instant, everything stopped. The ship's hull, once visible and strong, was now invisible, a mere shadow against the expanding emptiness. Even the stars had vanished. Carter was no longer floating in space. He was floating in nothing. His mind raced. Could he survive this? Could anyone? Was there even an anyone left? He tried to reach out to Evelyn, but the comms were dead. The data, the mission, everything was collapsing. He was trapped in a place where he was nothing more than a lost echo in a dying void. And then, a voice, not Evelyn's, whispered across his comms. It was soft, like a distant murmur, an almost alien sensation. It wasn't a language he could understand, but it was clear. It was a warning. Carter, you should not have come. The words reverberated in his skull, the meaning settling into his consciousness like ice. This wasn't just a malfunction. This wasn't an accident. This was the reason they were here, the true purpose behind the mission, to probe the limits of human knowledge, to reach beyond the known universe into something else. The ship, the spacesuit, their entire existence, it had all been drawn here, to this very moment. His breath stopped. He understood now. They hadn't been sent into space to explore. They had been drawn into the rift. And the rift had always been waiting for them. Carter's heart pounded in his chest as the voice faded into the silence. The oppressive void that surrounded him seemed to press inward, suffocating, as if reality itself had forgotten him. He was no longer floating in space. He was adrift in a timeless expanse, the boundaries of the universe fading like ink dissolving in water. The voice, was it real? Or had his mind finally cracked under the pressure? He didn't know, but something deep within him felt the cold touch of finality. This was not his reality. The stars had gone. The Odyssey 7 had vanished. The only thing left was the weightless nothingness. He could feel it now, too. A subtle tug, a shifting pull on his mind, like gravity, but not of any world. It wasn't an external force. It was something deeper, something that resonated within the very core of his being. It was as if the rift itself had begun to understand him, to connect to him, his thoughts, his fears, his longing for survival. And then, a flash, for a fraction of a second, a brilliant spark of light illuminated the void around him. The shimmer returned, far more intense this time, radiating through the fabric of reality itself, pulling at the edges of his vision. In that brief moment, Carter understood it all. The rift wasn't just a tear in space, it was a doorway. And the Odyssey 7 hadn't just been pulled into it, it had been summoned. The rift wasn't a cosmic anomaly. It was a consciousness, a presence, a force that existed beyond space and time, a being, or perhaps a collective, that thrived on the crossing of dimensions. It had been waiting, watching, drawing explorers, adventurers, and fools into its fold. And Carter had unwittingly opened the door. As his mind fought to comprehend the enormity of this revelation, a deeper, darker truth became clear. He hadn't been the first, and he wouldn't be the last. The anomaly was growing, spreading. What had started as a simple mission had unwittingly unleashed something far more terrifying than any of them could have imagined. His breath quickened, his chest tightening. But this time, it wasn't from the lack of oxygen. It was the realization that he, along with the ship, was trapped in a liminal space, one that existed not between worlds, but between dimensions. A place where the rules of life, death, and time no longer applied. He wasn't just lost in space, he was lost between realities. Carter's hands trembled as he reached for his helmet, trying to gather the last of his thoughts. If there was any hope of survival, any chance to escape, he needed to act now. But what could he do? Was there any escape from a force like this? Could humanity even begin to understand the scope of what they had encountered? Suddenly the shimmer pulsed again, brighter, almost blinding. Carter shielded his eyes, but even through the visor, he saw the stars, the real stars, beginning to return. Not the same stars, different ones, unfamiliar constellations. His suit's sensors registered them. Alien worlds, galaxies that shouldn't exist. They blinked into existence, as if the rift was reshaping the cosmos itself. And then, like a whisper carried on the wind, he heard it again. "You will return." The words weren't spoken, they were felt. They penetrated deeper than the suit, beyond the airlock, beyond the walls of the ship, into his very mind. And in that moment, Carter understood. The rift didn't want him to die. It didn't want him to escape either. It wanted him to witness, to understand. He tried to speak, to shout, but his voice caught in his throat, strangled by the weight of the infinite truth closing in around him. The fabric of reality was unraveling faster now, the edges of space blurring and dissolving into something else, something new, a place where the limits of human comprehension would never apply. The shimmer grew brighter, engulfing him, pulling him into its fold, like a wave crashing against a shore. Carter's vision blurred, the edges of his consciousness slipping away. The last thing he saw, the last thing he understood, was the presence staring back at him through the rift. The intelligence that had lured him in, the force that existed beyond the stars. And then, darkness. The screen cut to black. The haunting silence of space filled the void. The rift remains. The stars shift again. And out there, in the infinite, unknown, the next expedition waits. Will they learn the same truth? Or will they too become lost in the vast unknown? You will return.